Hello, my name is Lynn Carson. I am a speech and language pathologist. I'm going to be leading you through this video today entitled Understanding What They Understand, the Remarkable Vocabularies of Babies. As always, I like to start off my videos talking about the why it's important for you as parents to watch this video. And in this e-learning video, we're going to be talking about early vocabularies, the vocabularies of babies and toddlers. I think it's really important for everyone out there to understand that although in these early years, I think the focus is about first words and getting babies talking, but it's actually their vocabulary, how many words they understand, that really drives what they're going to say. Children talk about what they understand. So the more words they understand, the more they're going to use to be able to talk with. So it's really important. The relationship between understanding and what is being said is really strong, especially in the early years. And a child's vocabulary skills, even in these first years, even at that young ages, are actually related in the years to come. So we know that toddlers that have strong vocabularies tend to be preschoolers and school-age children who have strong vocabularies. Good word learners tend to be good word learners. So you really want to be aware of that relationship and how it continues even past this early time. And there's a really strong relationship between vocabulary size and reading abilities. So as much as your baby is just little at this stage, you really are starting to develop that strong foundation in vocabulary and language learning, even at this time. And we'll learn more about that in this video. Here are the specifics. You are going to learn what receptive language is and why it matters to talking and to your baby's first words. We're going to find out how babies learn words and maybe even give a little think and try and figure out what your baby might say for their first word. And then, of course, I'll leave you with some easy things that you can do at home to help support your baby or toddler's growing vocabulary. So how much does your baby understand? How many words do they know? What kinds of words do they know? The term receptive language is a term used by speech and language pathologists to talk about the words that a child understands. We use the term expressive language to refer to the words that a child uses to talk. Okay? Babies understand language. They start developing their receptive language months before they actually begin to talk, months before you see that expressive language really start blossoming. In some of my other videos, I talk about the fact that a child's first word that they understand is usually their own name at around 5 months old. By 8 months old, they start to understand a few more words that they are familiar with and some short phrases like gotcha or come here and stuff that they hear in routines frequently. There were some really clever researchers that aimed to answer the question of what vocabulary size really looks like in these young babies. So there was a study of 1,000 children in the United States, and they measured the top 10% and bottom 10% vocabulary size. And they found that 10-month-olds, the bottom 10% had an average of 11 words in their vocabularies. They understood around 11 words. And the top 10% had an average of about 154 words that they understood. By 16 months, the bottom 10% knew about an average of 92 words, and the top 10% knew an average of about 321 words. That usually surprises a lot of parents when I do this talk live, because if you look at the next point there on the slide, at 10 months old, a 10-month-old really isn't saying that much. They have an average of about 0 words. Some are saying a couple of words at 10 months, but they usually understand a lot more than they're saying in their expressive language. By 16 months, they're saying around 50 words, maybe a little less as an average, 50 words around 18 months, but they're understanding a lot more. And we're going to start to explore a little bit about why that is. First, let's talk about what kinds of words your baby understands. What kinds of words might be in their early vocabulary. So English-speaking babies tend to have a large amount of nouns in their receptive language, a large amount of object labels or names of people. They also have some action words, some verbs in there as well, and words that are part of their daily routines, words they are very familiar with. Night-night, if you say that often, or any greetings, bye-bye, hi, those kinds of things. Now, keep in mind, those are the words that are typically in a young child's early vocabulary, but they only need to use words, they only need to use the words that they understand to talk given the opportunity. So for example, if your child understands some words that are associated with the park, like swing or slide, they really only need to use those words when they are at the park. So you probably won't hear them say that maybe around the house, even though it's actually in their vocabulary. The other thing to really keep in mind is that children at this age use words they understand primarily to meet their needs, to satisfy their needs, a lot of getting their wants met. And if they don't need to do this during their daily routine, if they don't have the opportunity to ask for things, either because as a parent you're kind of meeting their need before they even have said anything to ask for it, then they're not going to say anything. They will not use the words they have in their vocabulary because they don't need to. So that really brings us into how these early vocabularies, how these words that a child understands really start to drive what they're going to say. And it may seem random what your child will say for their first words or the words they choose to use as toddlers, but there's actually a little bit of method to the madness there, if you will. So firstly, let's look at the environment. So children use words that they hear and that they've been exposed to. Remember I said children talk about what they understand. So if you have a family that is growing up on a farm and your child has been exposed to seeing a tractor every day, there's a good chance that that could be part of their early vocabulary compared to a child who is growing up in the city and maybe doesn't see tractors very often. So maybe I put computer versus tractor there because I had a friend whose child's like second or third word was close approximation to computer because she saw her father working on the computer very often. So it really is about what a child is exposed to. Also their word type. So remember I said those vocabularies in the English language had a lot of nouns in them. And that's because remember, children talk about what they understand, so it's easier to understand meanings for things you can see and you can touch, which tend to be nouns. There's also something to be said about the word structure, how hard a word is to say. Your child will much more likely come out with choo-choo because it's easier to say instead of locomotive. And actually kids, very young children, tend to have what we call sound preferences. So they actually have sounds that they feel really good at saying, whether that be da 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 or ma ma ma, usually sounds that they have babbled with often. And we know that those types of speech sounds are going to be ones that they use in their first words when they start talking. And usefulness plays a major factor for these little guys, how important the word is to them. My son's first word was car. I don't think my daughter said car until she was closer to 2. She had absolutely no interest in talking about cars. It was likely that it was in her vocabulary because we saw them and talked about them, but she had no interest in talking about that, so she didn't use that word. So when I talk to parents of who have very young babies, it's actually, they tell me that it's surprising that they can hardly believe that in, a few months' time or such a short period of time, they will have a little child who is going to talk to them, to use words with them. And a lot of the questions I get are, what are first words like, and what kinds of things does my baby understand? So I thought I would show a video of my son. He's about 14 months old in this video, and I really liked it because it's just a simple interaction between he and I. We're doing a puzzle together. But when you pay attention to it, pay attention to the detail and are looking for it, he's actually really actively doing a lot of word learning in this basic interaction. And that's what it's really all about at these young ages, 10 months, between 10 to 18 months. There's a large amount of word learning that's going on in these very basic conversations. So I thought I'd just show you what that might look like.
Horsey. Horsey.
A sheep.
Echo.
Echo. Here, Echo.
C. Echo.
A dog. Here, Echo.
Echo.
Echo. Here, Echo.
Owl.
Out. They're all out.
Echo.
Echo. Here, Echo.
Cosy. Cosy. Echo.
Echo. Here, Echo.
Horsey. Horsey.
The horsey.
Horsey.
Here's the horsey.
I really like this video for a couple reasons. So you can really see when you're paying attention to it that he is trying to learn words. So the first thing he gives me is the sheep, and I think he calls it a horsey. And I tell him, well, that's a sheep. And then he listens to me and he's moving along and he moves over to the dog and he says sheep. And no, I say, well, this is a dog. And so that is really how, he really picked that up really quickly. Oh, this is a sheep. And he really tried to use that knowledge to learn what the next puzzle piece was. And he got it wrong and I corrected him again. And that's really what word learning is about in these early years. They make assumptions, they take a guess, and then they use the feedback they get in their environment to really kind of establish that correct word meaning. I also wanted to point out the other word he has in his early vocabulary at 14 months is the word echo. I don't know too many 14-month-olds that have the word echo in their vocabulary, and that's because it was the name of our cat. As you saw, we were giving our puzzle pieces to Echo, and that was a word he was very familiar with, that happened to be in his daily routine very often, and so it was in his early vocabulary. All right, let's take a little bit of a look at how babies are learning words. The first problem a young infant is going to come across is that they need to find the word in the speech stream. So I talk more in detail about this in some of my other videos, but to go over it briefly, we talk in sentences to our babies and our toddlers. We don't actually stop and break out each individual word. So the first job that these little guys need to do is actually figure out where words stop and where words start so they can kind of isolate that word out as we're talking to them. Once they can isolate that word out, then they can start to put a meaning to it. So at around 7 months old, babies start to kind of pick up on patterns of sounds that they hear. So echo, if we are thinking about this video again, my son had heard the pattern of speech sounds echo over and over and over again. And so his brain started to figure out that is probably a word. Those sounds go together. Often, that's likely a word. And they do this before they can start talking, obviously, at 7 months old. They also use other cues, stress and prosody, and I talk in more detail about that in some of my other videos, to try and figure out what words are. And they're using phonotactic cues, so rules. Their brains are very sensitive to rules on how certain speech sounds are put together in a specific language. And I encourage you to look at some of my other videos if you want to learn more about how babies learn speech sounds in more detail. But the answer to this problem is, well, how do babies find the word in the speech stream? The amount of speech that a child hears, that a young baby or toddler hears, actually influences how well they're going to be able to identify these words. So we know that the more talking that you do with a child when they're very young, the better they are at being able to kind of pick up those patterns. All right, so once this young baby has figured out a few sound patterns and what they think might be a word, the next step is for them to put a meaning to it. So how do they solve that problem? Well, they make what's called an initial fast map. They take a first good guess at what they think that word might mean. And they do this by making a few assumptions. So very young babies, as young as 10 months old, they just assume you are talking about what they are interested in. If you can see my son here, he said horsey for sheep, and because he's interested in that and looking at that, and I said, that's a sheep, he picked that up right away. He didn't say it back to that puzzle piece, but he picked it up. You could hear him say it to the next item. Oh, that's a sheep. Maybe that's a sheep too, the dog. You know, they're both black and white. They both have 4 legs. This could be a sheep as well. So he's taking a first good guess, an initial fast map at what he thinks the words might mean. And as kids get older, they really start using clues in their environment, what an adult is pointing at or what an adult is looking at, to try and really figure out what words mean. So in answer to the question here, how do they figure out what a word means? The kinds of communicative interactions that these babies and toddlers have with an adult actually makes a really big difference on how well they're going to learn word meanings. Here are a few other basic assumptions that young children make when they're word learning. So firstly, they just assume you are talking about the whole object. If you're going to say hot, for example, when you're talking about the stove, they are going to actually just assume that that whole stove is called hot. So just be mindful of what you're labeling for your young child, what you're talking about. They also just have a mutual exclusivity assumption. So their brains just naturally assume that words mean, words refer to different kinds of things, okay? And then there's the principle of conventionality. So there are some very clever researchers that found out that babies are very sensitive to the words being used by other people in their language, and they really try and learn the words that others are saying and that they're familiar with. All right, well, we're going to have a look at my son again, and he's about 16 or 17 months old in this video, and I thought I would let you just kind of have a think about what word you think he is learning when you watch this video. And then I want you to, if you've tried to pick out the word that you think is new to him and that he's trying to learn, then I want you to think about the kinds of things that I have done as the adult in the interaction that may have made helping him learn this new word a little bit easier. So let's have a look at this. Are you hiding?
Hidden.
Cameron, where are you? Cameron. Are you gonna hide? Cameron, where are you?
Got you.
Where are you? Oh! Peekaboo!
Doggy. Doggy.
There's the doggy on it. That's a kitty.
Kitty.
That's a kitty cat.
Pika. Meow.
Meow.
Doggy. Doggy.
There's no doggies.
Kika.
Kitty cat on the TV. Cameron, are you all done your breakfast?
No.
No.
Finish.
You finished?
Hair.
Okay, if you thought the word was kitty cat, kitty, then I would agree with you. We are having a little breakfast in the morning, and I'm watching the news as I typically did during breakfast, and it looks like he saw the best guess he had was that it was a doggy, and so he said, "This is a doggy," and I'm helping him because I right away give him, instead of giving him a very long sentence of, "Oh, well, that's not a doggy. No, that's not a doggy on the TV. I think that's a kitty cat." That's a lot of language. So I'm helping him by just saying, "That's a kitty cat." And he gets it right away. And he looks and says, "Kitty cat." And I'm also helping him because I wait for him to take the next turn. I let him think about it. Maybe he wants to talk about it more. Because remember, babies are really learning words about what they're interested in at this time. And he does. So he shakes his head and he says, "No, doggy." And I said, "No, that's a kitty cat." And he says, "Meow." And we have a nice interaction. And he's really starting to broaden his understanding about what a kitty cat means. Okay, so a few other quick tips on how you can help your baby develop a strong vocabulary. Remember, the first problem is that these infants need to find the words in the speech stream. They actually need to isolate those patterns of speech sounds they think could be a word before they're going to put a meaning to it. I put together another video called How Babies Crack the Language Code. So I talk in detail about how babies do this, how babies find words in the speech stream, and how you can help. If you want to have a look at that video, it talks about a lot of these in more detail. I'll go over it briefly here. So we're really talking about, when we're talking about infants that are trying to solve this first problem of finding the words in the speech stream, we're talking about babies that are from birth to 8 months of age, around about. And so really singing songs, nursery rhymes every day is a very powerful way to help infants find these words. Using infant-directed speech or baby talk is also known to be really helpful. And self-talk and parallel talk, that's really when an adult just talks a lot out loud to an infant. And we know that the more words and sounds an infant is exposed to really has a powerful impact on their language development. Now, the next problem is problem 2. The baby needs to then, once they've found the word in the speech stream, they need to attach a correct meaning to that word. And remember, they are making an initial fast map. So they are taking a good first guess. Now, a few things you can do to help with this are adding a lot of gestures into what you're saying. We know that adults that use a lot of gestures when they're talking with their babies and toddlers have children who have stronger vocabularies. And it's likely because it really helps make the word meaning crystal clear for a young child. So if there's a bowl of fruit on the table and your child is reaching for it, instead of just saying, "Oh, the apple," and pointing to that apple instead, or holding it up, "Oh, the apple," really helps to make that meaning clear. Oh, this is an apple. It really clarifies it as a big deal in word learning at this early stage. Also, remember to provide your baby or your toddler with a lot of different experiences. Babies talk about what they understand, and they put words in their vocabulary that are relevant to them and that they've had experience with. So the more experiences you can offer them, even early on, the better. And remember to talk about what your baby is interested in at that time, because they're really trying to use all those clues to attach word meanings really in those activities that they're highly interested in. So I thought I would add in a slide about what you should expect as a parent in terms of vocabulary growth for your baby and toddler. I don't think this kind of knowledge is out there enough, and I think I know at least parents have asked me about what they should expect, so I thought I would put that in. Now, initially, after your baby really enters the word learning stage, the 8 months plus, when they're really starting to put some meaning to what they are hearing, the vocabulary growth or the word learning rate is pretty slow. It's about an average of 8 to 11 words a month that they're adding to their vocabulary for a typically developing child. And we need to keep in mind that just because you have maybe said the word to that child doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to learn it really quickly right away. And they might be great at learning a word at one point and then they kind of lost it later. So it's a bit of a slow growth. But keep going and keep using all those tips and skills that I was talking about in the previous slide, because they really are learning, and things start to change when toddlers start developing a stronger vocabulary at around the 50-word milestone. This extra kind of word knowledge helps them learn other words, and the rates really start to increase. So around 22 to 37 words per month is what's added to a toddler's vocabulary on average after they hit the 50-word milestone. And they can learn words, some say, even after a single exposure. So this is really important, to keep exposing your babies and using all those cues I talked about in the previous slide, because you will see them start to learn faster and faster and faster as they get a little older. The last slide I wanted to put in was because a lot of parents ask me, well, you know what, my daughter was, saying a lot more at this age, and I think my son understood more, at this age. And, I think parents talk to each other about that as well and try and kind of get a grasp on why, what's normal and why their children might be showing some differences compared to other children they know. So I'd like you to keep in mind that vocabulary at this age varies widely. As you can see from that slide, 10-month-olds, the bottom 10% was around 11 words and the top 10% was 154. So that is obviously a wide range of vocabulary size. And this is why there are a few influences out there that affect how a child's vocabulary is going to develop. Now, I put a heading there of external factors. So the amount of words a child hears, we know that affects their growing vocabulary. So the more words they hear and the greater variety of words, those children tend to have better vocabularies. If the content of the speech input is responsive to a child's interests, so again, we know that parents who are talking about what children are interested in at that time, they tend to have children with stronger vocabularies. And like I was saying about the gestures, the parents who used a lot more gestures when they were interacting with their children, they tended to have strong vocabularies. But we can't forget that the child plays a role here as well. So remember, children talk about what's important to them, and personality and communication style really play a role here, especially early on. If you have a child who's very social and really likes to move all over, you know, and they're picking up items and showing things to you and being very social and trying to interact with you, chances are they're going to develop a larger vocabulary sooner because they just have a lot more opportunity than, say, a child who is a little more shy and a little more timid and doesn't like to explore or interact as much. Children also have different memory abilities for how they are able to actually remember the meaning of the words they're hearing. And there are differences between boys and girls in regards to vocabulary size. So here, these are just a few ideas on why, you know, one child would have such a large vocabulary compared to the next. But I think if you, the best you can do is keep those tips in mind about how to help your unique child develop a strong vocabulary, and that's the best you can do going forward. If you want to learn more, I know this video has gone on pretty long, but Meredith Rowe is a fabulous, fabulous researcher in terms of vocabulary in the early years, and she did a really cool podcast, and I put the link there if you are interested. There's also a very light, funny video about a dad reading the Dada book by Jimmy Fallon to his toddler, and it's pretty funny because you can really see that he's trying to put that word dada into his son's vocabulary, and it's kind of comical at the end what happens. So have a look there if you want a giggle. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch this video. Go to the Talking Together website for any comments, questions, feedback, all that. Thanks very much for listening.